A poor rancher rescued two native children from a raging river at sunrise. Their father arrived with 100 warriors. Can you imagine the terror of facing an army at dawn? The children were drawing something in the dirt, over and over, the same symbol. Boone Carter couldn't understand what it meant, but the way their small hands moved with such urgency told him it wasn't just a game. He'd pulled them from the rushing river 12 hours ago, during the worst storm anyone could remember. They should have been grateful. They should have been scared. Instead, they kept looking toward the horizon, as if waiting for something specific. What secret were these children hiding? The girl, maybe 8 years old, wouldn't stop touching a small leather pouch around her neck. Every few minutes, she'd open it, peer inside, then close it quickly, like she was checking something vital was still there. Something worth risking her life for in that freezing water. The boy, younger, maybe 6, had eyes that made Boone's skin crawl. Children aren't supposed to look at you like they know your future, like they've seen this moment before. When the storm finally broke, Boone thought the worst was over. He was wrong, because as the first rays of sunrise touched his property, he heard it, a sound that froze his blood. The rhythmic thunder of horses. Many horses, more than he'd ever heard at once. The children stopped drawing. They looked at each other, not with fear, but with recognition. That's when Boone realized the symbol they'd been scratching wasn't random. It was a message, a warning, but was it to protect him, or prepare him for what was coming? Stay with Narrative Odyssey to find out. Boone grabbed his rifle from above the door. His hands trembled as he checked the chamber. Only 3 bullets left. 3 bullets against what sounded like an army approaching his small ranch. The children stopped their frantic drawing and stood perfectly still, listening to the distant rumble of horses. The girl clutched her leather pouch tighter, while the boy pressed his face against the window. Neither seemed afraid. That terrified Boone more than the approaching riders. "Get away from there," Boone whispered, pulling the boy back. But as he did, he caught sight of what was coming over the ridge. Warriors, more than he'd ever seen, moving in perfect formation across the grassland. Their horses kicking up a cloud of dust, stretching across the horizon. At the front rode a man whose bearing commanded respect, even from a distance. Tall, straight-backed, feathers catching the morning light. Boone's mind raced. He'd lived on this land for 8 years, ever since Ruth died, maintaining peaceful relations with nearby tribes. He traded fairly, never took more than he needed from the river. Respected boundaries established long before he arrived. Why would they come for him now? The answer stood beside him. 2 children he'd pulled from the river, warmed by his fire, fed from his meager stores, protected through the night. Children who belonged to someone powerful enough to command 100 warriors. The girl stepped forward, placing her small hand on Boone's arm. She looked up with dark eyes holding surprising maturity, then pointed to the symbol in the dirt. It was clearer now in the daylight. Not random scratches, but a deliberate pattern. 3 wavy lines intersected by a single straight mark. Boone knelt to study it. The wavy lines could be the river where he'd found them. The straight line, his property, his fence line, or something else entirely. The sound of horses grew louder. They'd be here in minutes. The boy tugged Boone's sleeve, pointing to the back of the cabin, gesturing to cover his eyes, then pointing to himself, his sister, and the root cellar. They wanted to hide, but that would make Boone look guilty of something he hadn't done. How could he explain he'd rescued these children, not taken them? How could he make 100 angry warriors understand he was trying to help? The girl shook her head firmly when she saw Boone considering the boy's suggestion. She walked to the front door, placed her palm flat against the wood, and looked back with determination far beyond her years. She wanted to face whatever was coming. The horses were close enough now that Boone felt the vibration through his boots, close enough to see individual riders, their weapons, their grim expressions prepared for battle. Leading them was the warrior chief, the father of the children Boone had saved, a man who had no way of knowing whether the stranger in the cabin was their savior or their captor. The lead warrior raised his hand, and 100 horses stopped as one. The silence that followed was more terrifying than their thunderous approach. Boone stepped onto his porch, rifle held low but visible. He'd made his choice. Meet them head-on rather than cower like a guilty man. The children flanked him, the girl to his right, the boy to his left. Their presence felt like both protection and condemnation. The chief dismounted with fluid grace, younger than Boone expected, perhaps 35, with scars on his arms speaking of battles won. His eyes swept over the cabin, the corral, the small vegetable garden Ruth had planted years ago, taking in every detail of Boone's modest life. When those dark eyes settled on Boone, the rancher felt the weight of judgment. A man accustomed to being obeyed, feared, respected. A man who could end Boone's life with a single gesture. But when the chief's gaze found his children, everything changed. His stern expression cracked. Relief flooded his features, making him look like any father who'd found his lost children safe. The girl ran to him, calling out in words Boone couldn't understand, but whose meaning was clear. "Papa!" The chief dropped to one knee, gathering both children in his arms, his face buried in their hair, whispering soft, desperate words in their native tongue that needed no translation. Several warriors relaxed their grips on their weapons, but the reunion was brief. The chief stood, his expression hardening as he studied Boone. He spoke in careful, accented English. "I am Kestrel of the Northern Wind. These are my children. I'm Boone Carter," Boone replied. "I pulled them from the river yesterday during the storm." Kestrel's eyes narrowed. "My children do not go near the river alone. They know the danger." The implication hung like smoke. If the children wouldn't go to the river alone, someone must have taken them there. Someone like the white rancher, living closest to the water. The girl stepped forward, speaking rapidly to her father in their language, gesturing toward Boone, the river, the sky. She was telling the story, but Boone couldn't understand a word. His life hung on the translation of an 8-year-old. Kestrel listened intently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he knelt and examined the leather pouch she'd protected so fiercely. He opened it carefully, removing a small piece of carved bone. His face went pale as he studied it, turning it over in his palm. Whatever he saw changed everything. His posture, his breathing, his entire demeanor. "Where exactly did you find my children?" Kestrel asked, his voice deadly quiet. "About 2 miles downstream, caught in the rocks near Devil's Bend," Boone answered. Kestrel's jaw tightened. Devil's Bend is sacred ground. No one goes there without permission, especially not children. The carved bone in his hand seemed to pulse with significance Boone couldn't comprehend. "Someone sent them there," Kestrel continued. "Someone who wanted them to find what they found." Kestrel held up the carved bone for his warriors to see. Several shifted uneasily, whispering among themselves. "This belongs to my father," Kestrel said, his voice carrying across the silence. "He died 3 winters ago and was buried with his possessions at Devil's Bend, as is our way." Boone felt his stomach drop. "Your children found this in a grave." "Not found," Kestrel corrected. "Led to." Kestrel's eyes hardened. Someone told them exactly where to dig. Someone who knew our burial customs, our sacred places, our language. The implications hit Boone like a blow. Someone had manipulated children into desecrating a grave. Knowing they'd be caught in the storm, knowing they'd need rescue, knowing exactly who lived closest to that stretch of river. "You think I sent them there?" Boone asked, his voice barely steady. "No," Kestrel replied, surprising him. "You are not clever enough for such a plan, and your eyes hold no lies when you speak of pulling them from the water." Kestrel walked closer, the carved bone still in his palm. "But someone wants me to believe you are responsible." Someone who knows that finding my father's grave marker in the hands of a white rancher would demand blood payment. Boone's throat went dry. Blood payment? Our law is clear, Kestrel said. Disturb the sacred resting place of a chief, and your life is forfeit. His warriors murmured agreement. That is why someone chose this particular bone to plant with my children. They wanted me to ride here with 100 warriors and kill you. The girl tugged at her father's sleeve, speaking urgently, pointing toward the hills beyond Boone's property, gesturing like someone watching, hiding. Kestrel's expression grew grim. Ayanna says someone followed them to the river yesterday, a man on horseback, who stayed hidden in the trees. She thought he was hunting, but now we know he was watching to make sure they found what he planted. Boone finished the thought, and ensuring they nearly drowned, so I would be forced to rescue them. Bringing your father's bone into my house, making me an unwitting thief of sacred objects. Kestrel looked toward the hills, where his daughter pointed. Someone wanted you to kill me. But why? That is what we must discover, Kestrel said, turning to his warriors. Issuing rapid commands, half of them wheeled their horses toward the hills, following Ayanna's directions to search for tracks. You believe your children? Boone asked. You believe they were manipulated? Ayanna has her grandmother's eyes, Kestrel replied. She sees details others miss. And Takakota. He glanced at his son, studying the symbol in the dirt. He remembers everything exactly as it happened. Everything! The boy looked up and spoke in halting English. Man had scar here. He traced a line down his left cheek. Kestrel's face went deadly still. What did you say? Scarman told us. Grandfather's spirit calling from river. The chief's hands clenched into fists, and several warriors reached for their weapons. You know who that is, Boone said, reading Kestrel's expression. Yes, Kestrel growled. And if I am right, this was never about you at all. A warrior rode back from the hills at full gallop, shouting to Kestrel in their language. The chief's face darkened. They found tracks, Kestrel told Boone. A single horse, iron shoes, heading toward Millfield. Boone knew that town. 2 days' ride east, where territorial officials conducted land assessments and dealt with property disputes. Who is the man with the scar? Kestrel studied his children, as if memorizing their faces, before speaking, his voice carrying old pain. His name is Marcus Gann. He was a translator for the territorial government during the treaty negotiations 5 years ago. Was, until we discovered he was changing our words when he translated them. Treaties we thought protected our hunting grounds actually gave away our rights to the river and sacred sites. Boone felt pieces clicking into place. Devil's Bend, among others. When we protested, Kestrel continued. The officials claimed we had agreed to the terms. It was Gann's word against ours. But my father was there for every meeting. He kept detailed records in our own writing, records that could prove the translations were false, buried with him, as tradition demands. Kestrel held up the carved bone. This bone contains marks that reference those documents. Gann knows if anyone ever finds my father's burial site and examines what was placed there, his deception will be exposed. The setup made sense now. So, he tricks your children into disturbing the grave, Boone said, knowing you'd have to kill whoever possessed sacred objects, eliminating the only witness to his crimes, and ensuring the burial site remains undisturbed forever. Kestrel looked toward Millfield. While he claims more tribal land through forged agreements, Ayanna ran to her father, whispering urgently. Kestrel's expression grew grim. What did she say? Boone asked. Gann told them if they brought the bone to the white rancher by the river, their grandfather's spirit would be at peace. Kestrel said, his voice deadly quiet. He used their love for their grandfather to make them accomplices in his plan. The sound of approaching horses made everyone turn. The warriors who'd gone to the hills were returning, and they weren't alone. Between two mounted warriors rode a man on a tired horse, hands bound behind his back. Even from a distance, Boone could see the scar running down his left cheek. Marcus Gann had not made it to Millfield. As the group approached, Gann's eyes darted between Kestrel and Boone, calculating his chances. When he spoke, his voice carried the smooth confidence of a man used to talking his way out of trouble. "Chief Kestrel, I've been searching for your children all night. Thank the Lord they're safe." Kestrel stepped forward, and every warrior shifted to attention. "You have been searching for them?" "Of course," Gann said. "When I saw the storm coming, I worried they might be caught in the open. I've been riding since dawn, checking every homestead between here and town. It was a reasonable story. If not for Takakota's clear memory and Ayana's sharp eyes, it might have been believable." Kestrel walked to within arm's reach of the bound man. "My son says you spoke to them yesterday, told them their grandfather was calling from the river." Uncertainty flickered across Gann's features. Children often imagine things, especially during storms. Perhaps the boy misunderstood. "Show him," Kestrel commanded. A warrior opened Gann's saddlebags, revealing territorial documents, surveying tools, and a leather pouch identical to Ayana's. Inside were more carved bones, each bearing markings like the piece Ayana carried, clearly from a sacred burial site. "I can explain," Gann said quickly. "I found these scattered along the riverbank. I was bringing them to you, knowing they must be important to your people." Kestrel held up one of the bones, rotating it slowly. "This belonged to my grandfather's grandfather. It has not seen daylight for 60 years." His voice dropped to a whisper that carried more menace than shouting. "You have been robbing graves. That's not." "Be silent." Kestrel's command cut through Gann's protests like a blade. "Dakota, tell this man what he said to you yesterday." The boy stepped forward, his young voice clear and precise. Scarman said, "Grandfather's bones make powerful medicine for white settlers." Said, "If we bring them to Rancher Man, we get reward money." Said grandfather wants his bones to help his grandchildren. Gann's face crumpled as his lies fell apart. The boy is confused. Children don't understand. "Ayana," Kestrel continued, "what else did this man tell you?" The girl spoke in English, each word carefully pronounced. "He said you would be proud. Said bringing bones to white man would show we trust white people. Make peace." The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. Gann had used the children's desire to honor their grandfather and make their father proud, twisting their trust into tools for his schemes. Boone stepped forward, his anger overriding caution. "You used children to rob graves, made them think they were helping their family, while you planned to get me killed for your crimes. You don't understand the complexities of territorial law," Gann replied, some smugness returning. "These artifacts belong in museums, not rotting in the ground. I was preserving history." "Whose history?" Kestrel asked quietly. "American history, civilized history." Gann's mask slipped completely. "This land will be properly developed eventually. These primitive burial customs can't stand in the way of progress forever." Several warriors raised their weapons at the insult, but Kestrel raised his hand for restraint. "You forged treaties," Boone said. "Changed translations to steal land." "I corrected translations," Gann replied defiantly. "Made them reflect the reality of territorial expansion. What was going to happen anyway? And when Chief Kestrel's father kept records that proved your deception, I ensured those records would never surface." Gann interrupted, looking at Kestrel. "Your father was a stubborn old man who couldn't accept that his way of life was ending. The words hung like smoke from a powder keg. Boone saw Kestrel's hand move toward his knife, saw the barely controlled rage in his body. But before anyone could act, a warrior on the perimeter shouted a warning. More riders approached from the east. Territorial officials, by their uniforms. Gan's expression shifted to relief. You see, the proper authorities are here. This matter will be handled through official channels. Kestrel studied the approaching officials, then the evidence in his hands. Perhaps, but first, these men will hear exactly what you have done. My word against that of savages, and a dirt-poor rancher. Gan laughed harshly. I think not. But his confidence wavered when Boone pulled a folded paper from his shirt pocket, a territorial survey notice posted on his fence last week, bearing Marcus Gan's signature as the official translator. The territorial officials rode into the tense standoff with the confidence of men accustomed to authority. Their leader, a heavy-set man with silver hair and territorial badges, surveyed the scene with displeasure. I'm Commissioner Walsh, he announced. We received reports of an armed gathering that threatens territorial peace. Gan straightened in his bonds. Commissioner, thank God you're here. I've been taken prisoner by these savages. They're threatening to kill me over some misunderstanding about artifacts. Walsh's eyes moved between the 100 warriors, the bound translator, and Boone standing with the children. Mr. Gan, you were supposed to file your survey reports yesterday. When you failed to appear, we came looking. As you can see, I've been detained against my will, Gan said. Kestrel stepped forward, holding the carved bones where Walsh could see them. Commissioner Walsh, this man has been robbing our sacred burial sites. He manipulated my children into desecrating graves. Preposterous, Gan interjected. These people are obviously trying to interfere with legitimate territorial business. They're angry about lawful land assessments. Walsh examined the carved bones with interest. These do appear to be significant artifacts. Mr. Gan, are these part of your archaeological surveys? I found them scattered by the river, Gan replied smoothly. I was bringing them to the proper authorities for cataloguing, but Boone stepped forward with the survey notice. Commissioner, this document bears Mr. Gan's signature. It authorizes a land assessment of my property for potential territorial acquisition. Walsh took the paper and studied it carefully. Yes, this appears to be in order. The survey was conducted yesterday, Boone continued. But according to Mr. Gan, he was searching for missing children all night and found these artifacts by accident this morning. The contradiction hung in the air. Walsh looked from the document to Gan, his expression sharpening. Mr. Gan, when exactly did you conduct this survey? There may be some confusion about the timing, Gan stammered. There's no confusion, Ayana said clearly. Scarman came to our camp 3 days ago, told us about grandfather's bones, said, bring them to White Man by River. Walsh's attention focused on the girl. You're saying Mr. Gan visited your village 3 days ago? Yes, Tekakoda added. Before the storm, told a secret about bones making peace. The commissioner's face darkened as he began to understand. Mr. Gan, if you were in the tribal village 3 days ago, how do you explain conducting a survey yesterday that you claim prevented you from searching for these children? Gan's lies were collapsing. The children are mistaken. The stress of being lost has confused their memory. Both children, Walsh asked skeptically, with identical false memories. Commissioner, Kestrel said quietly. There is more you should know about Mr. Gan's activities. A warrior brought forward evidence from Gan's saddlebags, documents detailing other burial sites, sketches of sacred locations, and a list of territorial officials with notations about their willingness to overlook irregularities for compensation. Walsh's name was not on the list, but several colleagues were. The commissioner's face went white as he read. Mr. Gann, these papers suggest a systematic pattern of grave robbery and official corruption. Those are research notes. Academic study of indigenous burial practices. Gann protested, but the evidence was overwhelming. The contradictions impossible to explain. Walsh looked up, his expression betraying discovery of betrayal in his ranks. Mr. Gann, you are under arrest for fraud, theft of artifacts, and corruption of territorial proceedings. As Walsh's men bound Gann's hands with official restraints, the corrupt translator made a final desperate attempt. Commissioner, you're making a grave mistake. These savages have obviously coerced the rancher into supporting their lies. They're trying to undermine legitimate territorial expansion. Walsh studied the evidence. Mr. Gann, these papers are in your handwriting. The corruption list includes payments you received. The children's testimony is consistent and detailed. Children can be coached. Gann snapped. By whom? Walsh interrupted. A poor rancher who's never left his property. A tribal chief who had no knowledge of your crimes until this morning. Gann's face twisted with rage as his final lie crumbled. Fine. Yes, I altered some translations, but I was protecting American interests from these primitive savages who don't understand progress. The admission hung like a confession at trial. Kestrel stepped forward, his voice calm, but carrying deadly authority. Commissioner Walsh, by your laws, this man has confessed to theft, fraud, and desecration of sacred sites. What is the penalty? Prison, Walsh replied. Mr. Gann will face territorial court and likely serve several years for his crimes and the lands he stole through false treaties. Walsh looked uncomfortable. That will require extensive legal review to determine which agreements were corrupted, while you conduct your legal review. Kestrel said quietly, my people remain homeless on land our ancestors are buried in. The commissioner had no answer for that injustice. Boone spoke before fully forming the thought. What if there was another way? Both Walsh and Kestrel turned to him. My property borders the river for 3 miles. The water rights, the grazing land, the access to Devil's Bend. Boone looked at Kestrel. I never asked for ownership of sacred ground. What are you suggesting? Walsh asked. A trade. Boone said. My land borders yours anyway. What if, instead of lengthy court battles, we simply corrected the boundaries? Give back what was taken through fraud. Kestrel studied Boone with new respect. You would give up your property. I'd be giving up land that was never rightfully mine to begin with. Boone replied, gesturing toward his small cabin, his modest corral. I don't need 3 miles of river frontage. Never did. But where would you live? Boone had been thinking about that since pulling 2 children from the water. I've been alone on this ranch for 3 years, ever since my wife died. Maybe it's time I found a different way to live. Ayana tugged at her father's sleeve, whispering in their language. Kestrel listened, then smiled for the first time since arriving. My daughter asks if the man who saved their lives would consider becoming family. The offer hit Boone like a physical blow. Family? It means a place in our village, Kestrel explained. Work that matters. Children who already trust you. He glanced at his son and daughter. And the chance to help prevent future Marcus Gans from destroying what both our peoples value. Walsh watched with obvious relief. A voluntary land transfer would avoid years of legal battles and territorial tension. Mr. Carter, are you certain about this decision? Boone looked at his small ranch, the cabin where he'd spent 3 lonely years, the fence line marking his isolation, the river that had brought him 2 children and changed everything. Commissioner, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. 3 months later, Boone Carter sat beside the river at Devil's Bend, watching Ayana and Takakota play in the shallow water under their grandmother's careful supervision. The sacred burial site had been restored, the stolen artifacts returned, and the children had learned to swim in the calmer pools upstream. Commissioner Walsh had been true to his word. Marcus Gann was serving 5 years in territorial prison for fraud, theft, and corruption. The forged treaties were declared void. The stolen lands returned to Kestrel's people. 3 other territorial officials, named in Gann's corruption list, had been dismissed. Boone's old cabin sat empty now, though Kestrel suggested maintaining it as a meeting place for the tribal council and territorial officials, a neutral ground for honest negotiations. "You are thinking too much again," Kestrel said, settling beside Boone on the grass. "Just remembering the storm, the choice." Boone replied, watching the children's laughter carry across the peaceful valley. "When I pulled them from the river, I thought I was just saving 2 lives. You saved more than that," Kestrel said, following his gaze. "You saved my family, my people's sacred ground, the truth about the treaties." "I was just doing what anyone would do," Boone said. "No," Kestrel's voice was firm. "What you did required courage. Not just to jump in the river, but to trust when 100 warriors rode to your door. To give up your land when you could have fought to keep it." Boone smiled. "Best decision I ever made." And it was. His new life in the village gave him purpose he'd never known. He helped negotiate fair trade agreements between the tribe and territorial settlements, taught Ayana and Takakota to read and write English, while they taught him their language. He had become what Kestrel called a bridge builder, someone who could help both peoples understand each other. "Papa Boone," Ayana called from the water. "Come see what we found." The 2 men walked to the river's edge, where the children were examining something in the sand. "It's a turtle nest," Takakota announced proudly, using his English carefully. "Grandmother says babies will hatch when leaves change color." "Just like you found us," Ayana added, grinning at Boone. In the water, waiting to be rescued, Boone knelt beside the small depression in the sand, where tiny turtle eggs lay buried. New life waiting to emerge, just as his own life had emerged from the rushing waters of that storm 3 months ago. "We'll have to protect them," he said. "Make sure they're safe when their time comes. Just like you protected us," Ayana said, taking his hand. Kestrel placed a hand on Boone's shoulder. "Come, the council meeting starts soon, and they want your opinion on the new trading post proposal." As they walked away from the river, Boone glanced back at the peaceful scene. Children playing, sacred ground restored, 2 peoples learning to trust each other. The 100 warriors who had ridden here seeking blood had instead found justice. The poor rancher, who had lived alone for 3 years, now had a family and a purpose. Sometimes salvation comes disguised as a storm. Sometimes the greatest threats bring the greatest gifts. Sometimes pulling 2 children from a river is exactly what the world needs to heal old wounds and build new bridges. The rescue that began everything was complete. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage and compassion collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe to Narrative Odyssey and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to Narrative Odyssey.